that works if you're not fiscally responsible. You have to, in my opinion, begin at the beginning and have balanced budgets and careful approaches to reserves, et cetera, to be able to sustain a vision of the right kind of investments. And it also means finding savings on a constant basis. I want to emphasize this. The effort to find savings never ends. We are not in the kind of situation that sometimes occurred not because of anything done in the Bloomberg administration, because of the times that administration lived through after 9/11, after the Great Recession, where there were emergency efforts that had to be put together to find very urgent savings. We're not in that situation. But we are in a situation that I think requires sustained vigilance. And savings has to be an every year focus. And so you'll remember at the time of the preliminary budget, we talked about getting more savings out of agencies. So we set a goal between the preliminary and today of finding $500 million in savings. We have found $587 million combined with other savings. A grand total of the executive budget, we're adding $700 million in new savings. These are some of the areas. We're reducing overtime in some agencies, better use of space and reducing costs there, better procurement process. And this is real interesting, insourcing. We're finding situations, against some of the conventional wisdom, where having our own employees do work is cheaper than outsourcing to the private sector. So these are all areas where we found real savings. And the next slide will show you, combining the savings we found for the November budget modification, the preliminary budget, executive budget, grand total over those three actions in the last 6 months, $2.8 billion in savings. Now, this is a separate category. This slide doesn't make it clear enough. $2.8 billion in savings found in the last 6 months that are going to help us going forward. This piece, the $1.3 billion in healthcare savings, fiscal 18, obviously was one we were already assuming from our ongoing healthcare savings effort. That is on schedule, and that's going to continue thereafter. So this is a new thing and a good thing. This is an ongoing thing and a good thing, and it continues to work. This is another new thing. We're going to be instituting a partial hiring freeze for city government. It will affect certain managerial and administrative staff. So I want to be very clear what this is and what this isn't. This is not an across-the-board hiring freeze. It is not asking every agency to do exactly the same thing. It is not directed at the frontline workers who provide services to New Yorkers every day. This is really focusing on an area where, bluntly, government always needs to look at the managerial and administrative level. Traditionally, there's been too much money invested at that level, not always enough at the grassroots, at the direct service level. We're very proud of the investments we've made in teachers, police officers, et cetera. But we think there's areas where we can save. And this is largely achieved through attrition, not filling unfilled lines, and finding serious savings there. We will, by the time of the adopted budget in the next 5-6 weeks, we will be able to tell you what that dollar figure will be and how that will be applied in the budget. But we think it'll be a very helpful amount. Now, okay, this is straightforward. Reserves, all of these reserves continue exactly as they were at the time of the preliminary budget. And again, these are the highest ever. You see the helpful highlighting there. These are the highest reserves ever achieved by a New York City government. They are staying in place. They are projected on an ongoing basis because we believe this is necessary. Again, now less so because of the overall economic situation, more so because of the uncertainty we're seeing from Washington, D.C. Now, we came to the decision, because again, this is an exercise in making choices and choosing priorities. We came to the decision that while there's a lot of uncertainty in Washington, it's not a time for paralysis here. We have to keep investing in the things we think will improve New York City. And by the way, when you look at that job growth we talked about earlier, that job growth is part of what will sustain us going forward. That job growth not only means livelihoods for New Yorkers, it means obviously revenue that comes into the city, and growth facilitates more growth. A city that is on a growth pattern will be in a strong position on many, many levels going forward, including on the revenue front. That's why sometimes, as they say in the private sector, you have to spend money to make money. We know we have to invest to keep this city strong and competitive going forward. We're not going to let the uncertainty in Washington stop us from doing some smart and targeted investments. So let me talk about some of the things that we are focused on. Obviously, the Equity and Excellence for All program. This, to me, is probably the piece that will have the biggest long-term impact on New York City's future. If we can actually correct decades of mistakes in our school system and make it a school system that serves every child, with a high-quality education and across the board in every neighborhood, the ramifications of that for a better and fairer society, but also for a great workforce in the future, are extraordinary. And the ultimate, I think, not only the quality of life in the city improving in so many ways, but the money we will ultimately save because we made these investments at the right time. I think it will prove to have been a very wise focus. 3K for all, talked about this a lot the other day. I'm not going to go into detail again now. Happy to answer questions in a moment. But 3K for all, to me, this is investment. This is spending money where it can have the biggest impact. What we were doing in the past was basically we were upside down. We would put a lot of money into the education system at a point where it would have less impact. We would not invest as a city in early childhood education, even though there was so much evidence that was where you got the highest impact and that irreplaceable opportunity to reach children during their point of fastest intellectual growth. We're flipping the script. We're saying we have to do early childhood to the best and fullest of our ability. Doing that investment the right way will facilitate everything else we're trying to do on education and will particularly animate our ongoing effort to get all our kids reading on grade level by the time they take reading tests in 3rd grade. So this is a big focus. Again, it'll mean $36 million next school year, next fiscal year, and it will ramp up to $177 million for the school year starting in 2020. That's fiscal 21. We are also in the process fixing something that's been broken for a while. The Early Learn program, although well-intentioned, hasn't gotten the support it deserved. It's been an effort to give our young people, particularly from less advantaged families, our 3-year-olds, childcare, but without a lot of the professional development and curriculum support and educational quality that was really going to make it a game changer for our kids. That reform is also part of this announcement and putting all those services under the Department of Education. So we'll have the build out, as you know, over the next few years, and we'll be in the process of getting the additional support we need over these next few years. Now, another important, this is a talk about an everyday thing that parents care about and kids care about and teachers care about. I can't tell you how many times, going back to when I started being a member of the school board in District 15 Brooklyn in 1999, I cannot tell you how many times I've been at a PTA meeting or a town hall meeting where parents talked about the fact that there wasn't air conditioning in their child's classroom and how much that distracted everyone from learning. And there are some months of the year in New York City during our school year when it is just too hot in too many of our schools. We're going to solve it once and for all. This investment will allow us to, and it will start right away in the coming school year, will allow us to install air conditioning in all classrooms over the next 5 years. I think that's going to not only make it a more pleasant experience, it's going to really help us to educate our kids. Now, the affordability crisis I've talked to you about a lot. This is, I think, the issue that's most on the minds of New Yorkers. Folks are so desperately concerned about being priced out of their own city and their own neighborhood. There's a lot we have to do to address this, and that is, on one level, a focus on deepening all of our affordable housing efforts, but it's also about giving people the resources they need to pay for housing. More jobs, better paying jobs, more access to those jobs. That's another crucial piece of the equation. So first on the affordable housing side, we announced this earlier. We're shifting some of the focus within our affordable housing plan. We're adding a major investment, $1.9 billion. That's going to allow us to reach 10,000 more households with lower income levels as part of our affordable housing plan. And we devote 5,000 more of our units to seniors, 500 more to veterans. This is a strategic shift we think is very much necessary based on what we're seeing on the ground and what the needs of communities are. The access to counsel, a big priority for the City Council that we worked on together. This is going to guarantee that folks who make up to $50,000 and are threatened with eviction will have a lawyer provided to the city to help them avoid that eviction. That's going to be great for those families and for preserving affordable housing overall. And a new piece, and this is important, this investment in NYCHA, I want to remind you, we had a $1 billion investment earlier in the preliminary budget for the roofs at NYCHA, a crying need and a situation that was causing, sadly, some real health concerns, mold and other problems that were affecting the health of residents. That investment was huge to begin with. We're adding a $355 million capital investment to repair facades at $150 billion. These are buildings where we think there's real safety issues with the facades. We want to make sure people are safe. We're going to put that money in, and that will affect the quality of life overall in these developments. When you combine this, $1.355 billion, $1.33 billion basically, that's the biggest investment the City of New York has made in capital funding for NYCHA in any year in our history, to the best of our knowledge. And it reflects our commitment to the 400,000 people who live in public housing. And it also sadly reflects the fact that the federal government has been disinvesting over many years in public housing. It's a sad reality. You know, back in the time of my greatest predecessor, Fiorello LaGuardia, the federal government helped us build this extraordinary affordable housing that we call public housing. The federal government was front and center as part of the solution. Over the last 30 years or more, we've seen declining federal commitment. We can't stand idly by. This is a case where we had to do something bolder than ever before, and we think it's a smart long-term investment in affordable housing in this city. Now, another crucial piece that we need to address relates to our seniors. You know, the affordability crisis is affecting everyone. But for so many of our seniors, it's affecting them very deeply because, you know, a lot of people who are in the workforce in particular have some expectation of continued income, even growing income. For a lot of our seniors, of course, they're not getting a new income. They're on a fixed income, and that fixed income is having a hard time keeping up with growing expenses and a higher cost of living. We want to lighten the burden. I heard this a lot from council members over the last year and at town hall meetings. I think this is a real concern. It was something we could do about. So we're working with the state legislature over these coming weeks, a piece of legislation that we've worked together with State Senator Diane Savino, who, as you know, is a member of the IDC, and Assembly Member Brian Kavanaugh. This will create an expansion of the Senior Citizen Disabled Homeowners Exemption Program. It will mean a city budget impact of just over $61 million. And what it means is that folks who are part of 32,000 households, so this is a real far-ranging impact, 32,000 households, even more people obviously, they'll save on average $1,750 on their property taxes each year. And it's going to start quickly, so people will start to feel it in the course of this next fiscal year when passed in Albany, and we think there's a lot of interest in Albany in getting this done. And previously, folks, seniors who, in so many cases, you know, the famous phrase, cash poor and house rich, or house rich and cash poor, a lot of seniors in this city had a house paid off in many cases, but they didn't have any money, they didn't have any income, and they had to pay for everything else. This will increase that income threshold, a lot like we did with the rental exemption program, SCREE and DREE. It'll go from $37,400 to $58,400. This will mean for, you know, again, 32,000 households, a huge amount of relief. It'll allow them to make ends meet a lot better. And it's a recognition that seniors need a lot more support in terms of affordability. So this, combined with the earlier effort I mentioned to add more senior housing units to our affordable housing plan, and obviously the ongoing effort to win the mansion tax in Albany, which would benefit 25,000 senior households. These are all part of a big focus on senior affordable housing. Now next, continuing on affordability, we have issued a very clear vision to add 100,000 more good-paying jobs in the coming years. And there are investments we're making to achieve it. A lot was already underway, but we're adding to it. The green jobs, this is going to be crucial to our efforts to address climate change. This investment, $12.8 million, is going to allow us to train 3,000 New Yorkers. Once they're trained, this is not just short-term jobs. This is a career. This has long-term ramification. It'll give us the workforce we need to do constant retrofits and to improve the use of renewable energy in the city. For those 3,000 families, they're on a long-term track to a stable economic life. The Made in New York campus at Bush Terminal, also that's a $136 million capital investment. That's going to allow us to create 1,500 new jobs. Again, these are all areas where you're talking about high-paying jobs, long-term job opportunities. That'll be up and running in just a few years. These are examples, many more to come, of the kind of investments that will get us to that 100,000 job goal. And just a reminder, in that Made in New York campus, the average salary in those fields, in fashion, about $57,000 a year, in film and TV, about $53,000 a year. So that, again, squarely in the vein we want to see more such jobs in the city. We want to see jobs that people can afford to live on. That's where we're putting a lot of our strategic investments. Now, it's great to be able to say this sentence every single month, and that the NYPD, to their great credit, working with neighborhood partners and working with folks on the ground who are doing amazing work like the Cure Violence movement, we continue to see great success driving down crime. So first quarter this year, again, safest we've ever seen. Neighborhood policing deepening all the time. You'll see on the next slide a couple of key investments we're making now. We know domestic violence is an issue that we're seeing increased focus on, rightfully, by the NYPD and many other parts of the city government. We've been urging people to come forward more and more and not suffer in silence, and thank God many more people are. It's making very clear to us we have to keep investing to stop domestic violence at its core, but also to respond when, God forbid, it happens. Here are a couple of crucial new investments in family justice centers, in trauma care for affected children. This is part of a task force that was put together with experts from around the city and has come up with a vision of how we can deepen our efforts against domestic violence. Also, something that's worked really well, ShotSpotter has been a fantastic success. Has led us to be able to find a number of perpetrators we never would have in the past, to seize a lot of weapons we never would have in the past. We're continuing to add and cover another substantial piece of the city with ShotSpotter that will be in place by the end of next year. And the next area I want to talk about, and this again couldn't be more timely. I talked to you before about what it means to be in the safest city and the most prosperous city, and also the most immigrant city, and how we need to connect those dots. Well, sadly, while all those facts are true, while this city government in so many ways shows respect and inclusion for our immigrant fellow New Yorkers, the national situation has created tremendous fear and disruption. And obviously people who are hardworking people fear that their lives could be disrupted and or their loved ones could be deported. City Council's made this a major priority, and we agree with them. We'll be adding $16 million in the budget so that New Yorkers who are threatened with deportation, who are working to feed their families, including asylum seekers and a very, very sensitive group, the unaccompanied children, that we don't see a situation where families are torn apart, children are taken from their loved ones, parents are taken from their children. We need to be there for our fellow New Yorkers who are immigrants. We need them to have some confidence that there will be support for them. God forbid they end up in this situation. So we've done a number of things to instill confidence and support over the years, including NYC and the entire way our police force and other city agencies work with immigrants. But this piece, I wish we did not have to include this in our budget, but we have to because of the policies emanating from Washington. And a couple other very important areas. We've talked a lot about the opioid crisis, $38 million investment being made. We talked about this a few weeks back. Major concern for this city. This investment is going to allow us to reduce deaths from this tragic situation by 35% over the coming years. This is a work that will never end. Obviously, we cannot rest until we turn the tide entirely on this. I do want to give a lot of credit to the NYPD and other first responders who are using naloxone more than ever and are reversing overdoses at an extraordinary rate. We certainly heard about that during Staten Island Week, the amazing success NYPD members in Staten Island had. We got to get the root cause of this, and a lot of what we're investing in will help us do that. But in the meantime, lives are being saved every single day because we're giving our first responders and families the tools they need, and it's having a real impact. And then just a couple other key points I want to raise, because we need to keep improving the quality of life. All those big items I've talked about are crucial, but we have to consistently improve the quality of life in this city. So here at the easel, sorry, I'll have to take you over to the right here. This vision for the Manhattan Greenway, this is over a quarter century old, this vision, and still has not been achieved. Some extraordinary parts have, and obviously Hudson River Park's been a great example of success. But, you know, as many have said, this is the single most important island on the earth. And in so many ways, we're missing an opportunity to get people back to the waterfront and to give them that experience. You know, I've had a couple experiences that really convinced me of this. I used to live up here at 104th and West End when I went to graduate school in Columbia. That was back in the 80s. I loved everything that was available in Riverside Park, and I always wondered how it was that it wasn't something for the whole borough of Manhattan and for all the people in New York City. I also had the experience of being deeply involved in the creation of Brooklyn Bridge Park, and I saw it go from empty piers to one of the premier parks in the city, 80 acres, that's having an amazing impact on the quality of life for people in many parts of Brooklyn and for folks from all over the city. This is the wave of the future to keep getting back to the waterfront. And it correlates with the focus on our ferry service, which we're so proud of is going to start on May 1st. And I think that's going to be a game changer for how people get around this city. But all of it gets back to the same point. This is the ultimate maritime city. This is why we're here. This is why New York was started. This is why New York is great. And yet, the city was built to turn its back on the waterfront. And that got recognized decades ago, and some real progress is made. But we still haven't completed this fundamental vision, a greenway all around Manhattan Island. We're going to get that done. And the first piece we're working on is here on the east side. This has been waiting for a long time. We're going to invest $100 million to continue the effort to create the full contiguous 32-mile promenade around Manhattan. This piece, 53rd Street to 61st Street, crucial piece of the equation. We're going to get to work on that right away. Expected completion 2022. But that's the first piece that's tangible. We will have other announcements going forward on other specific pieces. Over here again, these circles, some big, some small, indicate where there are gaps in this greenway. And obviously we're going at one of the biggest ones right here, but there are a couple of other very major ones and then smaller ones that have to be addressed over time. We will be funding in this budget a study, and we expect results by the end of this year, that will give us the game plan on how long it will take to fill in all the gaps and how much it will cost. And then we will proceed to prioritize them and get to work on acting on each one. And that will be reflected in next year's preliminary budget. So that piece, I think, will improve quality of life in so many ways. Another piece that's important, everyone wants a cleaner city. Hasn't always been our #1 strength in New York City, but we are. And one thing is another pet peeve of mine I've experienced over many years is seeing how so many of our sidewalks are really dirty, and they have been dirty for a long time and never properly cleaned. As I said to the city council members, too many years of too much gum thrown on the sidewalk that never got cleaned up and so many other things. This investment in 14 sidewalk cleaning trucks that are literally going to power wash sidewalks and clean them up in a way we've never been able to do before. You'll start to see that this fall. Another great thing in terms of a cleaner and better city and a better environment, electronics recycling, something I've worked on for a long time, back to my city council days. Great work was done on Staten Island, and we started a pilot there, and it worked. Literally, folks could call 311, ask sanitation, come over, pick up their old TVs and other electronics. It worked like a charm. We'll be expanding that now in the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and that's going to make a big difference for the city as well. And it's going to be easier for people to just make that phone call and get stuff picked up. So those are examples of some of the great investments that improve quality of life. I will conclude with just a few points. You know, the goal of any budget, of course, is to express priorities, but also by definition to express values. Our values are clear. We want an inclusive economy. We want a fairer city. We want a sustainable city. We need to know this will be a place for everyone. We know in recent years that has been threatened. We know the cost of living and the growing development challenges have threatened the very nature of this city. We have to respond constantly with strategic moves that help us keep this a city for everyone. That is the magic of New York City. That it's someplace that has always been representative of every kind of people and that anyone had a shot to make it. And as the great city of immigrants, again, it's worked as a city of strivers and people seeking to better themselves and their families. We got to keep it that way. So this budget is about making the investments that will allow us to do that. Just a few key points. Sorry, one more point, and then I'll say a few words in Spanish. One more point. Again, we will not be paralyzed because Washington, D.C. is paralyzed. We're not going to, even if there's uncertainty in Washington, even if things go up and down in Washington, we're not going to let that change us. I said at Cooper Union some months ago, a national election doesn't change our values. Well, I would also say a White House plan or strategy doesn't change our strategy and our approach. We're going to stay true to our strategic vision. We'll deal with whatever comes out of Washington, but we're not going to wait. And I've talked to mayors all over the country who feel the same way. We got to keep changing and improving our cities while fighting for a different national reality at the same time. Just a few words in Spanish, and then Dean Fullahan will come up and fill in a few other pieces before we take your questions. Hoy presentamos un presupuesto que invierte el dinero de la ciudad donde más importa. Vamos a financiar iniciativas que aumentan oportunidades, mejoran nuestra seguridad y ayudan a más neoyorquinos a tener una vida digna. Vivimos tiempos de inseguridad, así que debemos establecer prioridades en nuestras inversiones. De todas maneras, vamos a invertir donde el dinero haga más para atender las necesidades de los neoyorquinos. With that, now going back to English, Dean Fullahan will come forward and will offer some insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to do a brief overview on the financial plan, and then there will be a technical briefing after the questions and answers. Just quickly on the quarterly update, what are the changes since the preliminary budget? So if we start at the very top, obviously, we were balanced in 2017 and 2018 when we presented the preliminary budget, and then in 19, 20, and 21, those were the gaps we confronted. We then have the revenue changes for the executive budget, modest changes in the current fiscal year, but more significant changes, reduction in our forecast of $567 million for all taxes. So while that is a reduction, and is a cautious estimate, and more cautious, I believe, than what most of our monitors and other people who've come out who've looked at fiscal year 18. It's still assuming growth. So we are assuming tax revenue growth of 2% in the current year, 3.2. It's still modest growth compared to what we have seen in prior years, but it does assume growth. And that reduction, therefore, follows out into 19, 20, and 21 because of the base reduction. On non-tax revenues, as we did in the preliminary budget, let's stay with the first slide. In the non-tax revenues, those are miscellaneous receipts, so we're recognizing some additional miscellaneous receipts, and in the current year, some additional one-time revenues, as we did in the preliminary budget as well. The next group, stay here. The next group on expenditures. This lists for you the expense changes, $153 million. These are the agency expenditures that have increased, and $733 million. As the mayor pointed out, basically these were offset, these effectively completely offset by the citywide savings program of $330 million in the current year, $370 million, and those numbers grow in the out years, as well as the pension line, which shows actuarial changes. That is not earnings. That has not, the reduction in pension has nothing to do with the pension earnings. That's simply actuarial changes that occur every year, and you're familiar with every year. Normally, that's actually been an increasing number from the actuary, and this year it's a reduction. Those two make up for both the agency expenses and the enacted state budget changes that the mayor referred to. The foster care reimbursement and the special education reimbursement, which are $34 million, and then in the out years, in the 18 and the out years, is $68 million. In the current year, that left us with an additional $672 million, which allowed us to add to the base we had of $3.1 billion, which now becomes 3.7, which is how we balance the 18 year. In the next slide, now I'll let you move. So this next slide is city funds, and once again, the technical briefing will go more detail. You're on the wrong slide. I jumped there. Thank you. On the city funds, the 18 number, $61.1 billion. And once again, the technical, we're happy to go over this. I would like to point out at the very bottom, the general reserve. We maintain as the mayor pointed out, in 18, the $1 billion general reserve in every single year of the financial plan, and the capital stabilization reserve of $250 million of every year. These are levels that have never been achieved before by the city. The traditional level is $300 million, which is actually what we have remaining in the current fiscal year. The next slide is the all-fund slide. And once again, the 18 number, 84.8 that the mayor talked about. Let's keep going. Just shows where the dollars come from and where they go. We'll keep going to the 10-year capital strategy. The mayor pointed out the 10-year capital strategy of $95.8 billion. This breaks it down into the major categories, with a significant amount of this expenditure being in state of good repair, plus the initiatives that the mayor highlighted. And then quickly to the next slide. This shows where the financing is coming from. So the very first line, general obligation and transitional finance authority, that's city debt. Then the water authority, which funds the DEP expenditures, and then the federal state amounts. And then finally, on the last side, which is the one we care about in terms of for our capital budget, is to maintain a long-standing. This is the long-standing benchmark of affordability, and it is saying that our city debt service as a percent of city tax revenues will remain below 15, well below 15% through our entire 10-year plan, and that's the key benchmark that the city has been using for decades. So with that, I'll turn it back to the mayor.
Well done. Okay, we are now going to take a lot of questions. Hold on, I'm drinking first. This is not alcohol. It might be tempting, but it's not.
Mr. Mayor, what percentage of the city's municipal workforce does the hiring freeze represent, both in terms of percentage and raw numbers, and how much are the budgetary savings out of the entire cost of the municipal workforce?
All that, we're going to come back for the adopted, again, I said 5-6 weeks from now, with a number and a specific vision. We think it'll be a meaningful contribution to our budget, but we have to discern the way we want to do that. Will not affect, as I said, frontline workers, but if you just focus on administrative and managerial workers in the city workforce, that's a lot of people. No, I'm not going to ballpark it today.
Can you give us some examples of job titles that we're talking about?
Again, that's all going to come out as we go on towards the adopted budget. Courtney.
How much is actually in the reserves plus the capital stabilization fund and the health care fund? So what is the total you kind of have in the bank should something disastrous happen?
$5.25 billion between general reserve, health benefits fund, and capital stabilization reserve. But importantly, that's this coming fiscal year of 18, but then it recurs in terms of the general reserve and the capital stabilization reserve for multiple years. And obviously the health benefits fund remains at its level. So that's a stable number going forward. Again, each of these items can be fought for. The ones we care about can be fought for and protected. And again, we're just not going to be paralyzed by uncertainty. We have to keep investing. So we believe these are smart and measured investments that will make a big impact. We also have unprecedented reserves. So we have an immediate bulwark if there were any challenges. I think when you add this all up, it's the right way to go. I would remind you, a question came up a few days back about, the state is taking its own approach. We have a different approach to how we would deal with federal uncertainty. We have, multiple opportunities in a year, in January, April, June, November, when we can modify our budget. And we have great capacity, and I know that Tony and Dean and our deputy mayors are all able to quickly make adjustments if we see a problem. We can slow down spending, speed up spending, whatever it happens to be. We have a lot of latitude. So if we see a danger, we can start acting on that danger very quickly. So the way I look at it, I'm sorry for the long answer, but I think you've asked the most essential question. The way I look at it is we could sit around dead in the water just waiting for the unknown, or we could keep moving and keep building our city. But God forbid something happens that's really going to hurt our people. We have plenty of ways to respond in real time and protect our interests. So we're quite confident about that. Yes?
On the subject of immigrant legal services, is there going to be any sort of screening or discernment? For example, there's a list of offenses for which the NYPD and the Department of Corrections cooperates with ICE. There's also another very long list of offenses that it does not cooperate with ICE, forcible touching, child endangerment, criminal possession of a firearm. Is there a good chance that taxpayer money could go to defend somebody who either the NYPD has turned over for a violent offense or has not turned over or not detained, but has committed what some consider a serious crime, like misdirection of prescription drugs?
No. The rules we'll create will not allow legal defense to be provided for anyone in the categories we are working with ICE on, so in the 170 categories. Obviously, those are folks who have been convicted. Let's be clear. Those are folks who have been convicted under our law. It's abundantly clear upon being convicted. We are in a position to work with ICE, and we believe that's good policy, so it would be counterproductive to provide legal defense. We're not going to do that. That law, as I said, we're looking at some potential additions to that law. Some of the categories that you mentioned are things we're going to look at. We'll have more to say on that soon. And the bigger point is, and this is why this whole debate is so broken, there's no words for it, and I'd ask all of you, look, you guys are in a position to help this city and this country understand this issue, and I would urge you to take that responsibility very seriously. Ask Commissioner O'Neill, ask any law enforcement expert, the vast majority of folks who are immigrants in general do not commit crime. The vast majority of undocumented immigrants do not commit crime. Many law enforcement experts believe that immigrants commit crime at a lesser rate than the general population. The number of people who commit very serious and violent crimes, like the ones in the 170 crime list, is very, very small, as opposed to the 500,000 undocumented immigrants who are here, the 500,000 permanent residents who are here, both in New York City, or take the 11 million undocumented folks in the country. This is all one big lie, because what's really happening here is this is about the demonization of immigrants, and it's about racism. If you really look at the numbers and you really look at the facts, crime is not being driven by a small number of undocumented folks who create violent and serious crime. We're talking here about the other 499,000 plus who are in a position where they could be deported, whether they committed a crime or not, or they could be deported for committing a very minor offense, such as a quality of life offense. We don't think that's right. So that's how we cut the...
I mean, the City Council said they're not interested in amending that list of crimes.
The City Council has not said any such thing.
The Speaker has
The
said
City Council is... My friend, I'm responding to you. The City Council will make a judgment when we have a dialogue with them and we present a proposal. Do not assume.
Okay, and even so, then there is a chance of somebody, say, convicted of forcible touching or misdirection of prescription drugs.
I don't think there is any such chance, honestly. I just don't.
There's $1.1 billion in the budget for construction of new jail facilities, Department of Corrections budget. What is that $1.1 billion going to fund, and will it go toward reconstructing Brooklyn House and Queens House?
So the reality right now is, since the decision made jointly with the council to close Rikers Island on the planned timeline of 10 years requires additional facilities, even though I have some disagreements with the council on some of the specifics of the commission report. The basic concept is sound, that we need community-based facilities. That money in the budget is for the design of those community-based facilities.
Community-based facilities in Queens, Brooklyn?
So this begs an important question. And it's a conversation we're going to have with the City Council in the coming days and weeks to determine their readiness to act on specific sites. My view is, if they are, and I think there's goodwill here. I think council members have been very open. But if there are specific sites that there's an agreement between the mayoralty and the council that could be activated, then we need a very specific timeline for beginning a ULURP process.
Has the city been in touch with the state government regarding the lease or purchase of Rikers Island for the expansion of Hawaii?
That's way off in the future. Right now, our focus is on determining the immediate pathway to whatever appropriate community-based sites. I'll also say that we have to, it's a 10-year vision. We have to keep making sure that folks both who work there and are serving time on Rikers are treated decently. So we still have work to do in the existing facilities to try and make them as decent as they can be in the meantime. But the immediate step to take with the council is to determine specific sites and to determine a pathway to begin a ULURP process. To me, the initiation of a ULURP process, even the announcement of the initiation of a ULURP process, is when the rubber hits the road. Again, that's a conversation we have started, and the sooner we can announce, the better off we are, in my view. David.
How much of the $2.8 billion in savings that you guys found over the last 6 months comes from the actuary re-estimating pension costs? And
it's not in there. It's not part of the 2.8. I was simply, what I was highlighting was the executive budget and the offsetting pieces, but those are not part of the 2.8.
So where does that, there's like about $700 million, I guess, that they estimate. How much is the estimated lower cost for the pensions in this budget?
The pension numbers were on that, the gap sheet, and it was, I apologize. It was 20 million in the current year, and then it was 200. It was basically about between 253 and 270 million every year thereafter.
Secondarily, given that President Trump is planning to visit next week, it costs about NYPD says it costs about $300,000 roughly a day to provide security for him. I don't see anything in this budget, sort of looking forward to, these kinds of visits by the president. Do you anticipate, you haven't been reimbursed so far for the costs during the transition? Is there anywhere in this budget that you're anticipating, spending more money on that? And not
an occasional visit like the president is doing is consistent with what President Obama did or President Bush did. That's already an assumption. It's not like best of my knowledge, we don't have a line in the NYPD budget. It is an assumption like General Assembly at the UN every year and things like that. Occasional visits, not our challenge. We can deal with that, and obviously there are situations where we get federal reimbursement historically for some of that. The question on Trump Tower, we are right in the middle of the final days and hours of that immediate issue being addressed. We don't know. Been a lot of communication back and forth with the Congress, with members of the Congress, and even some with the executive branch to determine what will be in the continuing resolution. A couple of jumps here. The continuing resolution will hopefully address at minimum the period between the election and the inaugural. We'd like to see as much definition going forward as possible. We're not going to be surprised, of course, if a lot of that has to wait till the full budget in the fall. But we've said very clearly we're not budgeting for something that's a federal responsibility. Again, I think that would be like saying, well, don't even bother to pay us back. We'll just budget. We don't believe it's appropriate. We believe this is an absolute federal responsibility. And I have to say I'm pleased, having talked to a number of Republicans in the Congress. I have not met, I haven't talked to every one of them, to say the least. But the ones I've talked to, no one disagrees in principle that this is the kind of thing the federal government should cover. So we're going to remain, at least modestly hopeful. Yes.
Mayor Blasio, you mentioned naloxone and emergency responses to opioid abuse. You also said the city would address the root cause. What do you believe the root cause is?
Oh, I think, we talked about this when we announced the policy. Some of the root causes, of course, were the proliferation of prescription drugs in quantities that never should have been allowed. And we are working to educate healthcare providers that they need to limit their prescriptions to the maximum extent possible. The classic situation. You have you come off an operation or something, you might be in pain for 3 days and they give you a 60-day supply of Oxycontin. That's unacceptable. That's dangerous. So we're trying to work with other partners to limit that problem. Obviously, more efforts to cut off supply of illegal drugs, more NYPD resources shifting that way. Some serious educational and preventative efforts in terms of young people. Those are all elements going at root causes. I would argue everything in Thrive NYC is another element of going at root causes because, the interplay of substance abuse and mental health challenges is quite deep, and we haven't had a go-to place to turn if you have either challenge in this city on an ongoing basis. Part of what my wife emphasizes with 888 NYC Well is now if you have a problem, if you have the beginning of a problem, if a loved one has a problem, there's a go-to place that can actually connect you to ongoing treatment before anything gets out of hand. I think that's going at the root cause. So all of those approaches. Who has not had a shot? Willie.
Two questions. The first is that the $1 billion in spending for new jail facilities appears to be spent entirely in the first year of the 10-year capital plan, 2018.
It's design money.
So that's all going to be spent in 1 year?
Well, you ideally want to spend it as quickly as possible. It's design money to do, and again, we are not putting a specific to this until we get some commitments from the council, but to do multiple facilities, the design alone is a very major and costly endeavor. You want to do as much as you can, certainly, in the first year. We're talking about this whole thing has to be achieved in 10 years. We would want to start immediately.
The suggestion from what you just said, is that your anticipation is that over the next year, you will have with the City Council agreement on siting facilities in order to be able to design.
Our preference, anticipation may be a little strong a word, but let me say preference, is to determine the specific sites and for there to be ownership by the council with the initiation or even the formal acknowledgement that the ULURP process needs to begin. That will allow us to start the design process because, as you know, ULURP is interactive. Like, to some extent, you have to do a certain amount of design to go through ULURP, and then other elements of design depend on ULURP. But look, 10 years is by one measure a long time, by another measure not that long a time. We need to start right away if there's agreement. If they really have skin in the game and they say, yep, here are the districts, let's start ULURP, we have every interest in moving as quickly as possible.
The second question is, there's discussions with the Metropolitan Museum of Art to require an entrance fee for non-city residents. Are you in favor of that, and could that affect the city?
I believe if it's properly implemented to specifically reach non-city residents, yes, I think that would be fair to ask non-city residents, obviously, many of whom are our 60 million tourists, to pay a little more. I'm a big fan of Russian oligarchs paying more to get into the Met. I don't think we have an assumption about city funding. I think it's about them being able to sustain their operations long term, and it would actually mean they wouldn't need additional city funding in theory. But no, the real issue is just to allow them to defray some of their costs in a way that's fair to city residents. Laura?
You tied the health of the city's economy and its current safety and success to the presence of the immigrant population here. I was wondering if you have seen, as some people have voiced concerns in recent months, actual specific impacts either on the revenue side, on sales tax collections, anywhere in this budget that you can point to definitive impacts of the new vibe on immigration from Washington and how that's hurting the city, or what impact it's having? Is there anything?
No, broadly no, and I want to define that for a moment. First of all, it's very early on. This administration's only been in place for a few months. There's a bunch of areas of concern. We are deeply concerned that undocumented families or mixed documentation families will stop seeking the things that they need as families, whether it's health care or public education or child care, or whatever it may be. We're concerned about our tourism levels. There's a number of areas to be concerned, but if you really break each one down and look specifically, we haven't seen seismic changes yet. And remember, again, this is part of what's different from when we were here, 2 months or so ago. Someone bring out the batting average here. I'm trying to remember which of the executive orders that we thought would be disruptive to New York City managed to get through without a successful court challenge. I mean, right now, it seems that there's a fundamental problem with many of the policies the Trump administration has attempted that are the ones that worry us the most. The immigration executive order was obviously successfully challenged in court. We saw the decision yesterday. The travel ban, twice successfully challenged in court. The repeal of the ACA failed. I'm not saying we should rest on any laurels. I'm not saying there aren't huge challenges ahead. I'm saying the things that materially would have affected us haven't happened. And the cold, hard reality is that a lot of the immigration enforcement has been an attempt to create fear and to score political points. It hasn't numerically differed that much from the previous administration. So, no, I think at this moment, and Dean, if there's any nuance to correct me on, I would say by and large, we have not seen specific things, factual things that have changed the way we budget. Who's next? Okay, Anna.
Two questions. The Citizens Budget Commission released a statement criticizing you guys for not cutting back on spending given the political and economic uncertainties. Do you think that you're spending
Where did we go wrong?
Or, is that something that you've considered? Do you think that maybe offsetting increases in spending isn't enough?
Look, I have a great deal of respect for the Citizens Budget Commission. They do very good work, and they're a great part of the civic construct that helps us think about a host of issues. We don't always agree, but I think they do a great service. I think it'd be an interesting survey to see how many mayoral budgets over the last decades they approved of wholesale. I think it's their nature to criticize mayoral budgets. It's their nature to oppose any new spending. I think it's just who they are. That's fine. We believe this is philosophical, and I think it's healthy to have a very open philosophical discussion. I would say this is a city that gave birth to the New Deal and a progressive vision of the role of government, and I subscribe to that vision. We think investing in things like pre-K and 3K builds a better future for everyone. We think investing in affordable housing keeps this city a place for everyone. You go down the list. Wouldn't take any of those investments back. Wouldn't take back our investment in 2,000 more officers on patrol and neighborhood policing and counter-terror forces. I'm comfortable that we made a series of strategic assumptions. They seem to be working. If you look at safety, if you look at job creation, if you look at increases in graduation rates and test scores, these investments are working. Of course we should keep making them. But at the same time, we have the highest reserves we've ever had. And we're ready on a dime to react to any changes in federal policy, if they're at all consistent, for more than a few days. So I think they're doing their job, but we're doing our job.
I mean, to be clear, they're not the only ones that said that
the nature of democracy. There'll be plenty of voices that, look, there's an ideological current that believes we should shrink the size of government. We disagree. Simple as that. We think that government needs to address people's needs and build the economic future. Look, I would argue more broadly, and this is a bigger point, a lot of the economies in the world, I don't pretend to be an expert. There are people like Alicia and Tony and Dean that know a lot more than me, but I believe a lot of the economies in the world that are working the best are where their governments are investing in infrastructure, education, research. That's actually the model that works in the modern world, and the absence of those investments holds you back economically as well as socially. I'll challenge anyone on that point. And we have a government that's the right size to address the needs of New Yorkers, and we have a balanced budget, and we have reserves. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Second question, the opioid plan, the homelessness plan, you've also spoken about a congestion plan.
Yeah.
Why hasn't that been released before the executive budget? Because, I'm assuming that plan would include new funding.
Our Transportation Commissioner, Polly Trottenberg, is working on that plan, and she'll bring it forward when it's ready. Again, we have many opportunities to adjust our budget along the way. It has to be ready, and I will say up front, there's some things we can do as a city. There's some things we will need the state to do because the state controls so many of our key highways. But she's working on that plan, and when it's ready is when we'll bring it forward.
Two questions. So a year ago at this press conference, we spent a lot of time talking about the Health and Hospitals Corporation and the dire financial situation that it was in at the time, with the city putting in more money just to get through that fiscal year. We didn't hear as much about that today, although I suspect the federal situation has probably not gotten better.
Well, it hasn't gotten worse either, and that's important. That's important. I think, bluntly, if there had been a repeal of the ACA, we'd be having a different discussion. It didn't happen. The scheduled repeal of President Obama's signature achievement did not happen. It's still there, and it's got a pretty strong position right now, having survived that first attempt. I'm not belittling this new attempt at all, but I'm saying, you only get one chance to make a first impression, and the first time around, the effort to repeal the ACA failed, and that's very, very important. This fiscal year, Health and Hospitals budget is in balance. Very aggressive plans for the future to address its long-term needs. We've had great cooperation with our labor partners, all of whom understand the depth of the challenge. And it's the same dynamic if the ACA survives. We're in that much better situation. If the ACA is struck down or limited, we're in that much worse situation. We'll have to adjust, but we're not presuming it because there's no reason to based on what we've seen already.
What's
Wasn't part of the issue with HHC hospitals the ACA itself, right? That undocumented people couldn't get that health insurance. And
that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. No, the big X factor was we have half. First of all, everyone, 2 million New Yorkers who have health insurance under the ACA. Imagine them no longer having it. That's disproportionately people who go to health and hospitals facilities. So there goes a huge funding stream. Second, we wanted to try and get at the 500,000 who are eligible and don't have it, which is why we started the Get Covered NYC initiative, which made great progress in January. And we intend to do a lot more. Now we have a lot more running room to keep doing that and getting more and more people health insurance. And then as they go to H&H facilities, there'll actually be reimbursement. So the undocumented situation has not changed. That's obviously a big problem. That won't be solved until there's comprehensive immigration reform. That's a ways in the future, to say the least. But we feel confident in health and hospitals situation this fiscal year. We think we have a good plan for next fiscal year. We're going to keep executing that plan. And we've been very clear. There'll be a lot of reductions through attrition. And if something changes with the ACA, then we're going to have to come back to the drawing board.
Just on the hiring freeze, it's obviously something new for the city budget under your administration. Can you explain to us what made you make the decision to do that? What was different this year that prompted the need for this?
Well, two things. I mean, we think there is room to do it is the number one reason. We have a certain number of unfilled lines, and as we've seen that phenomenon, we believe some of those lines don't need to be filled. And that's based on OMB's analysis, that scenario where you can save money. So we want to save money. And I said we're going to be doing savings on an ongoing basis as long as I have the opportunity to serve in this role. We're going to continue to do savings. This was a new area where we could get more savings, and we believed it could be done in a way that would not affect service to New Yorkers. So that's an immediate opportunity. And look, again, we look at these uncertainties very soberly. We just refuse to attempt a definition that cannot be achieved. We see the uncertainties. We're prepared. We're vigilant. We should always be looking for savings for every reason, but that's a great reason to go look for even more. And so it was an area we thought we could get more done in.
Mr. Mayor, if I'm reading the budget correctly, it looks like there's about $37 million more going to ACS. And I'm wondering, when David Hansel took over as commissioner, you said that you had assured him that there would be resources there to manage the agency in the way you felt was necessary. Did he ask you for, is this money that he asked you for because of specific things he wants to do differently, or is there a chance that the number could grow as he continues to evaluate the needs there?
First of all, Dr. Blasio asked me for a lot of that money. Some of that is a request by Dr. Blasio before Commissioner Hansel came in. Some of that is ideas that were worked through with Commissioner Hansel since he came in. I've made very clear to him that I'm going to support his efforts to improve the agency. So I think for this stage, he feels that the key things he needs are there. The door is open if he needs other things. But you have a very fine sense of that agency. We need to keep improving a set of things. We need to do more and better preventative services. We need to keep improving training and casework practice. We need to keep supporting the workforce that does incredibly difficult work, and they deserve more support from a variety of professionals to do that work. So this budget proposal reflects that.
So that's what that $37 million is essentially.
Yeah, we'll get to the whole breakout, but it's basically training, support for frontline workers, preventive services, et cetera.
Mr. Mayor, two questions. The first, it looks to my inexpert eye like we're planning to spend less next year on DHS than we're spending this year, and I'm wondering why that is. Looks like 1.6.
I'm not sure I see that, but Dean will speak to it.
So once again, there are adjustments in both years for both the shelter population in the current year of 45 million, then an additional 75 million in 18, and then there's also some model budgeting and other initiatives that go in DHS. You know, as we've been doing this, we monitor the census, we look at how the plan is going and the various costs, and we continue to make adjustments going forward. And that's all that reflects.
Is it because of the new shelter plan, building new shelters with capital money as opposed to operating money going to other
Well, once again, there are many different moving parts to this. We'll go into more detail afterwards if you like, but there are many different moving parts, and that's why we've been making adjustments on a quarterly basis to make sure that the appropriate funding level at DHS.
And then my second question is on the jail. So $1 billion for design, there's only $2 billion, it looks like, in the 10-year plan. So is that whole billion for this year for design? And then also, is some of that the money that had been allocated for the Bloomberg jail, and has that been reallocated? Is it fair to say that's off the table?
I'll let the mayor answer that, but the money was reallocated to a lump, so it is money that had been in the 10-year capital plan. You're correct. There's about $2 billion for all of corrections, and this was, as the mayor indicated, for design, and obviously, depending on the speed, $1 billion could certainly also provide construction as well.
Yeah, look, again, the notion is to figure out with the council a pathway, and we have the design money to immediately start working on that. And you have to, if you start to move a process quickly, you do need to do a certain amount of design up front to facilitate the process. That's the focus of that money. There is separate money because in a plan that will require 10 years, and we said the day we announced, Speaker and I said, and Judge Lippman has said, there are scenarios where it could take a little longer, so we have to be ready either way you slice it. But we still have to appropriately handle over the course of years what will be tens of thousands of people going through Rikers in the course of a decade, and all the people who work there. We have to invest in some of the existing buildings as well. So that $1 billion is about design for the new community-based facilities. There's other money that goes to just continuing to make health and safety and basic improvements in the existing buildings.
But that's $600 million jail, the Bloomberg.
That is just, I said it earlier. Everyone focus. I said it earlier. That's just on hold. It's just that plan is on hold, and there's a new plan we're working on. Okay, what else? Who has not had a shot? Who hasn't had a shot?
Mr. Mayor, you began by talking about choices, not everything could be funded. Can you give us 2, 3 examples of things that sort of were left on the cutting room floor? You just said we couldn't. And how close were you, along those lines, how close were you in discussions with the City Council about doing a pilot of the fair fares, or is that still totally off?
You jumped my answer right there. Look, the fair fare proposal is a very good idea that we should not do as a city expenditure. It's $200 million. It's a huge amount. It should be the responsibility of the MTA. It's a good thing, but in a world of choices, one, we have other things I think are even more strategically important, but that's beside the point. Structurally, it should be the responsibility of the MTA. I really strongly believe that. So that's an example. And look, every year you can see it in the budget. Every year, the council has historically been interested in a number of areas that, with perfect resources, we would endlessly invest in. We love our cultural institutions. We've made major investments over the last few years. At this point, there are other things we have to focus on more. We love our libraries. At this point, there's other things we have to focus on more. So it's an ongoing process, but there will still be an opportunity to take a few more actions by the time of adoption.
On fair fares, I guess, when you rolled out 3K the other day, you said we're going to put some money into it, show that we can get it going, but then we need funding from elsewhere to make it a full reality. The City Council's proposing this pilot program for a small portion of fair fares. Wouldn't that follow the same logic? We could show it works with a small group.
No, I'll tell you why. It's a very, very good question, but I really want to argue a difference. Education has historically, the funding streams for education have historically been federal and state. But the implementation has been decidedly local. This is America. School systems are run very, very locally, but the federal and state governments provide a lot of the funding. So that effort to sustain 3K is consistent with that formulaically. But the minute you take responsibility of the MTA and you start it at the city level, don't be surprised if people in Albany try and keep it at the city level. Then you're between a rock and a hard place. We've started something. Are we going to finish it? If we're going to finish it, we're going to take away from other strategic priorities, and now we're taking the MTA off the hook once again. The MTA needs to look at its expenditures and decide its priorities, and it needs to be really careful to make sure it is investing enough in New York City, which has been a historic concern. But I'm not going to allow in that or many other areas the state to shift expenses onto New York City. Okay, who has not gone yet? Yoav?
Mr. Mayor, you sounded very frustrated.
Then Yoav, go ahead. Go ahead.
You sounded very frustrated at Albany not approving design build for new buildings. What's it going to take to win over the people?
Pressure. I think if you walk up to any taxpayer, Democrat or Republican, and you say, how do you feel that you're having to spend $450 million more that you don't have to spend? Do you think that's right? I think they'd be pretty clear about it. I think we need to get that consciousness out there and direct it at legislators and the governor to say this is just a ridiculous waste of taxpayer money. We could be getting so much more done for the same expenditure. And I think there's a lot of people in the business community who will fight for this change. I think there's a lot of people in labor who will fight for this change. We're going to have to build a coalition. We've tried reason. I hope you're sitting down. Reason did not work in Albany. We tried it. We tried, we've been nice, we've been polite, we've been reasonable, and we're still seeing a misuse of taxpayer dollars. So we're going to try a harder approach.
Have you talked with other cities like Syracuse, Buffalo, maybe get the cities around the state as a coalition?
I think it would be a smart thing. I haven't had this specific conversation. I know there's lots of frustrated local leaders in this state. But it's just, the famous phrase, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It was good enough for the state of New York. Why not just apply it to localities so they can get more done and save tax? Friends at the state level act like they are a separate entity than all the people who live in New York State. We're 43% of the state's population. Our strength and